The cabin door was still open when the last first-class passengers settled into their seats. Soft conversations drifted through the aisle while overhead bins clicked shut. In seat 2A, a well-dressed black man calmly opened a leather folder and reviewed several neatly organized documents. He neither looked around nor searched for attention. His quiet confidence seemed to belong there. "Would you like something before departure, sir?" a flight attendant asked. "A glass of water, please." "Thank you. I'll bring it right away." Across the aisle, a businessman glanced over his newspaper. "Do you know him?" he whispered to the woman beside him. She looked briefly, then shook her head. "No. He seems unexpected." "What do you mean?" "I just didn't expect—" His sentence faded, but the thought remained. Another passenger leaned forward. "Is that really seat 2A?" "I think so. Maybe they're sorting something out." The man in 2A continued reading without reacting. Years of experience had taught him that some conversations were loudest when spoken in whispers. The attendant returned with the water. "Here you are, sir." "Thank you. You travel often?" "Often enough." She smiled politely, yet her eyes lingered on his boarding pass resting beside the folder. Behind her, another crew member quietly asked, "Everything okay?" "I think so. You think?" She hesitated. "I'll check again in a minute." The businessman watched them. "See? I knew something wasn't right." The woman beside him shifted uncomfortably. "Or maybe they're just doing their job." He shrugged. "We'll find out." The cabin slowly grew quieter. Fewer people spoke. More people looked. The man in seat 2A turned another page, completely composed, refusing to acknowledge the growing attention surrounding him. A young passenger across the aisle noticed the silence. "Mom, why is everyone staring at that man?" His mother lowered her voice. "I don't know," but neither of them looked away. Before the aircraft moved an inch, judgment had already begun its journey. The question from the young passenger faded into another uneasy silence. The engines were still quiet, yet the atmosphere inside first class had already changed. Conversations resumed in whispers, never quite loud enough to be challenged, but impossible to ignore. Through it all, the man in seat 2A remained focused on the papers before him. He turned another page, underlining a sentence with a silver pen. "Excuse me?" the businessman called softly. "Are you waiting for someone?" The man looked up with a calm expression. "No, I'm exactly where I need to be." "Oh, I only wondered." "I understand." His eyes returned to the document without another word. The businessman leaned back. "Confident, isn't he?" The woman beside him replied, "Maybe because he has no reason not to be." He frowned, but stayed silent. The man in seat 2A checked a report filled with maintenance figures and employee satisfaction summaries. Small handwritten notes filled the margins. Every page received the same careful attention as though each detail mattered. The flight attendant noticed the stack of papers. "Business trip?" she asked politely. "You could call it that. What line of work are you in?" He smiled. "I spend most of my time listening." She seemed puzzled. "Listening? People usually tell you everything you need to know." For a moment, neither of them spoke. She nodded politely and walked away, but glanced back before reaching the galley. Another crew member whispered, "Did he answer?" "Not really. What do you think?" "I can't tell." Across the cabin, more eyes drifted toward seat 2A than toward the windows. The man noticed every glance without acknowledging a single one. Long ago, he had learned that confidence never needed to announce itself. It simply remained steady while other people searched for reasons to doubt it. Around him, curiosity slowly stopped looking like curiosity. It was becoming something far more dangerous. The uneasiness settled over the cabin like invisible smoke. No one openly accused the man in seat 2A of anything, yet attention kept returning to him. Every glance seemed to ask a question that nobody wanted to speak aloud. Then one quiet whisper changed everything. The businessman leaned toward another passenger across the aisle. "Are you sure he's supposed to be sitting there?" The older man adjusted his glasses. "I don't know. First class isn't cheap." "No, it isn't." "So, doesn't something seem unusual?" The older man hesitated before answering. I guess it does. The words traveled farther than either of them intended. Woman pretending to read her magazine. Lowered it slightly. I heard someone say there. Might be a seating mistake. Another passenger murmured. Really? I don't know. That's just what I heard. No evidence appeared. No one checked a boarding pass. Still, uncertainty quietly spread from row to row. The man in seat 2A continued reviewing his papers. His expression never changed, though he recognized the familiar rhythm of whispered assumptions. It was not the first room where silence had worked harder than spoken words. A flight attendant noticed several passengers exchanging looks. "Is everything all right?" she asked. The businessman smiled politely. "We're just a little confused." "Confused about what?" He shrugged. "I suppose you'll figure it out." She looked toward seat 2A, then back at him. No one else spoke. That silence became its own answer. The attendant slowly nodded, not because she had proof, but because doubt had already entered the conversation. A mother quietly reached for her son's hand. "Just stay seated." Did that man do something? "I don't know." The child looked toward seat 2A. "He doesn't look angry." "No, he just looks quiet." The mother couldn't explain why the cabin suddenly felt divided. Nobody had made an accusation. Nobody had demanded action. Yet somehow, a single whisper had convinced an entire room to question one man's right to belong. The unanswered questions hung over the cabin long after the whispers faded. Nobody had presented evidence, yet uncertainty had already become part of the atmosphere. The flight attendant stood near the galley for a moment, watching seat 2A from a distance before taking a slow breath and walking back down the aisle. She stopped beside him with the same welcoming smile she had offered every passenger. "Excuse me." "Sir." He looked up and closed the folder in front of him. "Yes? I hope I'm not interrupting." Not at all. Her smile remained. But something behind it had changed. "I just need to verify something." "Of course." She glanced at the boarding pass resting beside his papers. Her eyes stayed there a little longer than necessary before meeting his again. "Would you mind showing it to me?" He handed it over without hesitation. "There you are." "Thank you." She examined it carefully. Seat 2A, first class. Everything appeared correct. Still, she looked at it again. The man waited patiently. "Is there a problem?" he asked. She hesitated. "I'm just making sure." "I understand." He never raised his voice or questioned her request. She handed the pass back but didn't leave immediately. "Have we met before?" she asked. "I don't believe so." "You seem familiar. Perhaps you know someone who looks like me." The answer caught her off guard. "Maybe." She forced another polite smile, yet uncertainty remained on her face. Behind her, another crew member quietly approached. "Everything okay?" She lowered her voice. "I'll explain in a minute." The second attendant looked briefly toward seat 2A before nodding. Neither of them noticed several passengers watching every movement. The businessman whispered, "See? They're checking him." His companion didn't answer. She simply watched the man place his boarding pass back inside the folder with steady hands. The attendant walked away, but her pace had slowed. Nothing in the boarding pass justified her concern. Even so, the decision forming in her mind no longer depended on what she had seen. It depended on what she had already chosen to believe. The attendant disappeared into the galley, but the feeling she left behind remained in the cabin. The boarding pass had confirmed everything, yet doubt refused to disappear. Instead, it quietly found new places to hide, settling inside cautious glances and unfinished conversations. A soft chime echoed through the aircraft. "Ladies and gentlemen, boarding is now complete." The announcement sounded routine. Nothing else did. The cabin doors began to close, sealing every passenger inside the growing tension. The businessman folded his newspaper. "I still think something is off." The woman beside him sighed. "Based on what?" "I can't explain it." That's exactly the problem. He looked away without replying. Across the aisle, the young boy whispered again, "Mom, why does everyone keep watching him?" She answered carefully, Sometimes people decide things before they know the truth. The man in seat 2A quietly returned to his papers. He made one final note in the margin, closed the folder, and rested his hands together. His calmness never changed, even as he felt the weight of unfamiliar eyes following his smallest movement. Near the front of the cabin, the two attendants spoke softly. "Did everything check out?" "Yes." "Then why are we still talking about him?" "I don't know." The second attendant studied her colleague's face. "You sound uncertain." "I am." Passengers fastened their seat belts. No one spoke loudly. No one pointed. No one demanded action. Yet, invisible, lines had already been drawn between those who belonged without question and the one man expected. To prove he deserved his place, outside, the aircraft waited for permission to leave the gate. Inside, another journey had already begun. It required no runway, no engines, and no destination. It traveled through assumptions, gathered strength from silence, and reached conclusions without evidence. Long before the airplane prepared for takeoff, prejudice had already boarded the flight, while justice was still waiting at the gate, unseen by almost everyone aboard. Justice was still waiting at the gate, unseen by almost everyone aboard. Inside the cabin, the silence felt heavier after the doors closed. The flight attendant glanced towards seat 2A once more, straightened her jacket, and walked back with the same practiced smile that had hidden her uncertainty only moments earlier. "Sir, may I see your boarding pass again?" He looked up calmly. "Again?" "I'm sorry for the inconvenience. It's just a routine verification." Without hesitation, he opened his folder and handed it to her. "Of course." "Thank you." She accepted the pass with steady hands. Though her eyes betrayed a different story, the businessman watched closely. "I knew this wasn't over," he whispered. His companion frowned. "Or maybe she's just doing her job." The attendant studied the boarding pass as if expecting new information to appear. Seat 2A first class. Passenger name confirmed. Everything matched. Even so, she did not return it immediately. The man waited patiently. "Is something incorrect?" he asked. She forced another polite smile. "No. Everything appears fine." "Then why does it feel like an examination?" Her expression tightened. "I assure you, sir, this is standard procedure." He nodded slowly. "I travel often." "So do many people. I've noticed." She hesitated. "Noticed what?" "That routine checks rarely feel routine when they're repeated without explanation." Neither of them raised their voices. The surrounding passengers listened without, pretending they weren't listening. The attendant finally handed back the boarding pass. "Thank you for your cooperation. You're welcome." He placed the pass inside his folder with the same calm precision as before. Around them, conversation stopped again. No official accusation had been made. No rule had been cited. Yet, a simple boarding pass had quietly become something far greater than proof of a seat. It had become an unspoken test of whether he truly belonged where he had every right to be. It had become an unspoken test of whether he truly belonged where he had every right to be. The flight attendant held her radio close to her shoulder, hesitated for only a second, then pressed the button. "Front cabin requesting assistance." A brief reply crackled back. "Understood." "Officers are on the way." Several passengers looked toward the boarding door. The businessman folded his arms. "I knew something was wrong," his companion answered. Quietly. "You still don't know that." Within moments, 2 airport police officers stepped into first class. Their expressions were calm, professional, and unreadable. The taller officer approached the flight attendant first. "What's the situation?" She lowered her voice. "I have concerns about a passenger in seat 2A. "What kind of concerns?" "I'm not completely sure, but something doesn't feel right." The officer nodded once. "We'll handle it." He never asked to see the boarding pass. He never requested an explanation from anyone else. His partner looked directly toward. "Seat 2A, that's him?" "Yes." The surrounding passengers watched without speaking. A woman quietly whispered, "Police don't come unless something serious happened." Another passenger nodded. "I was thinking the same thing." No one asked what had actually occurred. The officers walked confidently down the aisle. The man in Seat 2A calmly looked up from his folder as they stopped beside him. "Good afternoon," he said. The taller officer replied, "Sir, we need to speak with you." "Certainly. Please. Remain where you are for the moment. I wasn't planning to leave." His calm answer received only a brief stare. The officer rested one hand near his duty belt. The atmosphere inside the cabin shifted. Again, the uniforms alone seemed to answer questions nobody had bothered asking. Passengers who had doubted moments earlier now watched with quiet certainty. Authority had entered the cabin before evidence ever did, and for many people, that alone felt enough to decide who belonged on which side of the story. For a long moment, nobody moved. The officers remained beside seat 2A, waiting for the man to respond, while the cabin watched in complete silence. He looked at their uniforms without fear, and something familiar settled over him. It was not panic. It was recognition. He had seen this moment before, only in different places and with different faces. His thoughts drifted backward to a small neighborhood where he had learned that belonging was often questioned before his name was ever spoken. He remembered walking into a grocery store with his mother. A cashier smiled at the customer ahead of them. When they reached the counter, the smile disappeared. "Can I help you?" the cashier asked flatly. His mother answered politely, "We're ready to pay." The woman counted the money twice before accepting it. As they walked outside, the young boy finally asked, "Mom, did we do something wrong?" She squeezed his hand. "No." "Then why did she look at us like that?" His mother searched for an answer that wouldn't steal his childhood. Sometimes people see a story before they see a person. He never forgot those words. Years later, another memory followed. He was 10 when a security guard stopped him outside a department store. "Where are your parents?" "They're inside." "What were you doing out here?" "Waiting." The guard looked unconvinced. Only after his father stepped outside did the questions end. On the drive home, nobody spoke for several minutes. Finally, his father broke the silence. "You noticed what happened?" "Yes." "It won't be the last time." The boy stared through the window. "Why?" His father exhaled slowly. "Because some people decide who you are before they decide whether they know you." The words hurt more because they were spoken without anger. Back in the present, the officer's shadow stretched across the aisle beside seat 2A. The man looked up calmly. Nothing about the uniforms surprised him. Nothing about the suspicious glances felt new. The airplane was different. The faces were different. The lesson was exactly the same. Long before strangers questioned whether he belonged in seat 2A, life had already taught him that prejudice rarely announced itself with shouting. It usually arrived quietly, smiled politely, and waited for everyone else to mistake silence for proof. The metal cuffs had disappeared from his wrists, but they could never erase the truth hidden beneath the silence. While officers congratulated themselves and passengers replayed the confrontation in shocked whispers, another story quietly unfolded beyond the airport. The man they believed was just another traveler had spent decades building the very airline surrounding them. Unknown to everyone inside that terminal, he owned the controlling interest that had transformed a struggling company into one of the nation's most respected carriers. The audience alone now understood the painful irony. Those entrusted to protect the airline's values had humiliated the person who created them. Across headquarters, framed mission statements hung neatly on polished walls. Every employee had read yearly letters signed by the company's chairman, encouraging fairness, humility, and respect for every passenger. Those letters inspired new hires, shaped leadership meetings, and reminded staff that kindness defined real success. Yet very few had ever seen the man behind the signature. He deliberately avoided publicity, believing a leader should never become more important than the principles guiding the company. His absence from cameras had protected his privacy, but today it also protected the assumptions that had placed him in handcuffs. Anonymous travel had always been his preferred method of inspection. Instead of announcing executive visits, he quietly purchased tickets, boarded flights alone, and watched ordinary moments unfold naturally. He paid attention to greetings, delayed families, nervous children, elderly travelers needing assistance, and employees serving customers without realizing leadership was watching. Reports could be polished. Real behavior never could. Today's flight exposed something no spreadsheet or executive presentation had revealed. The company handbook promised dignity before judgment, yet suspicion had arrived before conversation. Courtesy had lasted only until appearance replaced evidence. Policies remained beautiful on paper, while prejudice quietly shaped decisions in practice. The failure belonged to a culture hidden beneath polished smiles. Inside headquarters, his executive assistant checked the time again. Usually, a short phone call arrived after every inspection flight. Today, nothing came. She dialed once more. The call continued ringing without answer. Quiet concern slowly spread across executive offices. No one realized their chairman had vanished into the center of an incident already growing far beyond the airport. And every unanswered second pulled the entire company closer to a reckoning nobody saw coming. While unanswered phone calls continued echoing through headquarters, another truth quietly waited beneath years of polished reports and congratulatory meetings. The incident involving Seat 2A had not appeared from nowhere. It had grown inside a system where forgotten complaints became invisible, one ignored story after another. Customer service forms had been submitted, apology emails had been drafted, and internal reviews had been promised. Yet investigations often ended before they truly began. Delays exhausted frustrated passengers until many simply stopped asking for justice. The airline's spotless reputation remained intact, but only because uncomfortable truths rarely reached anyone willing to confront them. One file described a decorated disabled veteran who repeatedly requested assistance while boarding. He watched employees warmly help other travelers while quietly passing him by. His written complaint never demanded punishment. It simply asked why dignity seemed available for everyone except him. Management answered with careful corporate language, calling the experience an unfortunate misunderstanding before closing the case without meaningful change. Another report belonged to a Muslim family whose vacations always seemed to begin with extra security checks. Their young children eventually stopped asking why officers searched their bags more than everyone else's. They packed their belongings expecting suspicion before excitement. Internal records labeled every inspection routine procedure, reducing years of emotional damage into harmless administrative language that concealed far more than it revealed. A talented Hispanic pilot carried nearly flawless performance reviews and glowing recommendations. Senior executives praised his professionalism during meetings, shook his hand, and encouraged patience. Promotion after promotion went elsewhere. Less qualified candidates advanced while he remained waiting, beneath compliments that sounded supportive. But changed nothing. Then, there was an elderly black professor whose first-class ticket had been questioned before takeoff. Witnesses remembered her embarrassed silence long after landing. She filed a respectful complaint describing humiliation instead of outrage. Managers called it an isolated misunderstanding, and archived her words beside countless others that would never receive another glance. One internal conversation exposed the culture more clearly than any official investigation ever could. A regional manager shrugged and quietly said, "If nobody important complains, nothing happened." No one challenged him. The sentence settled over the room because too many people recognized it as normal. Now, without realizing it, the quiet passenger from Seat 2A had become part of that same hidden history. The difference was impossible to ignore. Every forgotten voice stood quietly behind him, and this complaint would never disappear into another forgotten file again. The complaint could no longer be buried inside another forgotten file because the evidence had already escaped the airport. Before the aircraft ever pushed away from the gate, passengers quietly uploaded short videos showing officers leading the handcuffed man through the aisle. Some recordings lasted only seconds. Others captured longer moments of silence. Together, they spread across social media with astonishing speed. Within hours, Thousands of strangers were watching a scene that company executives had not yet realized existed. A private incident had become a public conversation that could no longer be quietly erased. As more recordings appeared online, each new angle added another missing piece. One passenger had filmed from the front of the cabin. Another had captured the officers entering. Someone seated across the aisle unknowingly recorded the reactions of nearby travelers. The videos did not contradict one another. Instead, they strengthened the same uncomfortable picture. People noticed the passenger sitting calmly while others whispered. They saw officers acting with complete confidence before asking meaningful questions. The silence inside the cabin suddenly looked less like order and more like assumption. Television stations replayed the footage throughout the afternoon. Commentators discussed policies, procedures, and passenger rights. Yet viewers kept returning to one detail impossible to ignore. The man never shouted. He never threatened anyone. He never struggled against the officers. His steady voice and controlled movements created a question larger than the arrest itself. Why had someone behaving with such dignity been treated like an immediate threat? During one live interview, a reporter turned toward a passenger who had witnessed everything. "Why didn't he fight back?" she asked. The witness looked at the paused video before answering quietly. He didn't need to. The studio fell silent for a brief moment. Those 5 words spread across social media almost as quickly as the original recordings. They challenged certainty without attacking anyone. Thousands who had immediately defended the officers began replaying the videos with different eyes. Online comments slowly changed from quick accusations into careful questions. Truth was not arriving through outrage. It was arriving through patience. Meanwhile, every major news outlet requested a statement from the airline. Hours passed without an answer. The silence itself became another headline, leaving people wondering whether the company was searching for facts or protecting itself. Unknown to nearly everyone involved, those ordinary phone cameras had captured far more than one painful arrest. They had preserved the evidence that would finally force an entire system to confront the truth it had avoided for years. The viral footage continued spreading faster than official answers, and inside headquarters, another ordinary workday quietly began unraveling. Among hundreds of automated reports, a routine security alert appeared in an employee's inbox. Normally, such notifications were reviewed, categorized, and forgotten within minutes. This time, however, the report included links to rapidly growing media coverage surrounding the airport incident. Curious about the unusual attention, the analyst opened the videos, watched them carefully, then forwarded everything to corporate security with a brief note, asking for immediate verification before rumors overtook. Facts. Corporate security downloaded one of the clearest video frames and uploaded the passenger's image into the company's confidential facial recognition database. Everyone expected an employee record or perhaps no match at all. Instead, within seconds, a restricted executive profile filled the screen. The room became completely still. Nobody reached for a keyboard. Nobody questioned the software. The photograph, identification number, and private access level confirmed something so extraordinary that silence arrived before anyone found words. One senior executive stepped closer. Reading the name once, then again? That's impossible. His voice barely rose above a whisper. Around him, experienced leaders stared without blinking as the truth settled across the room. Their chairman, the man whose letters shaped the company's culture and whose decisions reached every department, had just been handcuffed by employees working beneath his own authority. Shock quickly surrendered to panic. Phones appeared in every hand. Legal counsel received urgent calls. Airport supervisors were ordered to respond immediately. Operations managers demanded updates. Public relations teams were pulled into emergency meetings before anyone even knew what statement could possibly explain the unimaginable. Every unanswered call increased the pressure, making each passing minute feel heavier than the last. Across headquarters, normal conversations disappeared. Hallways filled with hurried footsteps instead of greetings. Employees carried laptops, confidential files, and stacks of reports between offices. Whispered questions floated through open doorways, but almost nobody possessed complete information. Department heads avoided long conversations because every new rumor sounded worse than the one before. Meanwhile, the chairman's assistant dialed his private number again. The call rang without response. She tried another secure line with the same result. His silence frightened her more than the breaking news because he had never ignored scheduled check-ins during anonymous inspection trips. As several executives rushed toward the airport, a painful realization followed them. This crisis had grown far beyond one passenger or one flight. Years of overlooked warnings, buried complaints, and comfortable assumptions were finally meeting undeniable truth, and the institution itself could no longer escape the consequences of its own decisions. The executives hurried toward the airport, carrying a truth that had not yet reached the people responsible for the arrest. Inside the security office, however, the atmosphere could not have felt more ordinary. The officers believed the difficult part of their shift had already ended. Paperwork rested neatly across the desk, coffee cups sat half-finished, and quiet confidence returned almost immediately. Outside, several black vehicles stopped near the terminal entrance. Members of the airline's legal department stepped out carrying confidential files and secure communication devices. Their determined pace drew immediate attention from airport staff. Employees stopped ordinary conversations and watched them disappear into restricted corridors. Nobody explained what was happening, yet whispered questions spread faster than official answers ever could. The confidence that had filled the building only moments earlier slowly began fading. Workers noticed unfamiliar executives moving quickly through security checkpoints without hesitation. Department supervisors avoided long conversations, while reception desks received unexpected instructions to redirect incoming calls. The atmosphere changed without anyone raising a voice. One officer finally looked toward the main hallway and froze. Several senior executives were running directly toward the security office. Their faces showed neither anger nor confusion. What he saw instead was unmistakable fear. His smile disappeared. The room grew strangely quiet. As the distance between the executives and the officers closed, everyone nearby sensed authority shifting without a single command being spoken. Those who believed they controlled the situation only moments earlier were now standing face to face with a truth that required no shouting. The balance of power had already changed, and nothing inside that airport would ever return to ordinary again. The executive stopped several steps away before the lead attorney quietly spoke. "That passenger is Chairman Elijah Brooks," he said. "His signature authorizes every paycheck this company issues." Confidence vanished. Nobody argued. Every assumption collapsed beneath one undeniable truth. The quiet man they arrested had built the airline they proudly served every single day without ever recognizing his face beforehand. Officers looked toward one another, searching for explanations that disappeared before forming. Their shoulders lowered, confident expressions faded, and conversations stopped. Nearby employees quietly looked down, avoiding eye contact. Nobody questioned authority anymore. Power had shifted completely, leaving disbelief where certainty once stood. Without threats, arguments, shouting, or resistance from anyone present that unforgettable afternoon together inside security offices. One officer stepped forward with trembling hands and reached carefully toward the metal cuffs. The locks opened with a sharp click that echoed across the silent hallway. Moments earlier, the sound had represented unquestioned authority. Now every echo carried embarrassment, regret, and the painful realization that assumptions had replaced evidence before anyone paused long enough to seek simple truth together. The officer swallowed hard before speaking. "Sir?" was all he managed. That single word held fear, apology, confusion, and respect at once. Nobody expected forgiveness. Nobody knew what should come next. Every person nearby waited quietly, understanding that the chairman's response would reveal more about leadership than every policy manual stacked throughout headquarters ever had before. Elijah. Brooks calmly straightened his jacket and looked at the officer without anger. "No," he said softly. "Finish your paperwork." The sentence landed heavier than any punishment. Mercy exposed every mistake with remarkable clarity. Nobody could hide behind excuses anymore because quiet dignity revealed failures that humiliation alone never could expose so completely before everyone. Silence settled across the hallway with surprising weight. Executives avoided speeches. Officers offered no defenses. Employees remained still, listening only to distant airport announcements drifting through the building. Inside every mind, uncomfortable questions replaced certainty. Accountability no longer required accusations, because personal reflection had already begun accomplishing what confrontation never could achieve through force or public embarrassment. Elijah Brooks took one measured step toward the exit without looking back. The handcuffs were gone, yet their memory remained inside every witness watching him leave. Everyone understood the real investigation had only started. What happened that afternoon would force the airline to confront buried prejudice, hidden failures, ignored complaints, and forgotten promises with honesty at last. Elijah Brooks left the security office without celebration, but his quiet departure marked the beginning of something far greater than his own humiliation. Independent investigators arrived within days, carrying authority that reached every department of the airline. At first, everyone believed they were examining one wrongful arrest. That assumption quickly disappeared. Every interview uncovered another unanswered question. Every report pointed toward older complaints, and every discovery suggested the same painful conclusion. They were no longer investigating a single incident. They were uncovering years of ignored warnings hidden beneath polished procedures and comfortable silence. Storage rooms that had not been opened in years suddenly became the center of attention. Investigators carried dusty boxes filled with archived complaint files into conference rooms. Reports once dismissed as isolated misunderstandings now appeared remarkably familiar when placed beside one another. Different airports, different managers, and different passengers repeated nearly identical experiences. Alone, each complaint had seemed easy to overlook. Together, they revealed a pattern nobody could honestly dismiss anymore. Former employees slowly found the courage to speak. Some had remained silent for years, fearing damaged careers or quiet retaliation. One after another, they described subtle discrimination, inconsistent discipline, and repeated warnings ignored by supervisors more concerned with protecting the company's image than correcting harmful behavior. Their voices carried relief rather than anger because someone was finally willing to listen without dismissing uncomfortable truths. Passengers also stepped forward from across the country. Their backgrounds differed, but their stories shared striking similarities. Some remembered suspicious stares before boarding. Others described unnecessary questioning or unexpected seat challenges. Many recalled filing respectful complaints only to receive carefully written responses that solved nothing. Different experiences pointed toward the same hidden culture where quiet prejudice survived behind professional smiles. Throughout the investigation, Elijah Brooks refused to become its public face. He declined repeated interview requests and encouraged investigators to focus elsewhere. He understood the issue had grown beyond his own experience. The forgotten voices buried inside old files deserved attention more than the chairman whose position guaranteed he would eventually be heard. Meanwhile, investigators quietly connected emails, surveillance footage, complaint records, and witness testimony. The evidence formed a clear picture without dramatic speeches or emotional confrontations. Every document supported the next until denial became impossible. As findings reached the public, longtime defenders of the system grew noticeably quieter. Former managers avoided cameras. Colleagues distanced themselves from disgraced leadership. Institutions that once resisted criticism slowly accepted responsibility. Without revenge, public humiliation, or angry demands, truth accomplished what years of ignored complaints never had. It unlocked every closed door and awakened an entire system ready at last to confront itself honestly. The investigation's findings spread far beyond company offices, drawing national attention unlike anything the airline had ever experienced. Television networks interrupted regular programming after executives announced a live press conference. Anchors spoke with unusual seriousness as countdown clocks appeared across broadcasts. Living rooms, airport lounges, restaurants, and office break rooms filled with people waiting for answers. Most viewers understood this story had outgrown one passenger's experience. It had become a national conversation about fairness, leadership, and whether powerful institutions could truly accept responsibility when their own failures finally came into public view. Every major network replayed the same footage again and again. The quiet passenger sat calmly while whispers surrounded him. The officers approached with confidence. The handcuffs clicked into place. Each replay revealed details audiences had missed before. A hesitant glance from one flight attendant, an uncomfortable expression on a nearby passenger, a brief pause before an officer reached for the cuffs. The story no longer centered only on the arrest itself. It challenged viewers to examine how quickly assumptions had become accepted as truth. Social media reflected the country's divided emotions. Some users insisted the officers had simply followed procedures based on available information. Others questioned why those procedures had ignored basic fairness from the beginning. As additional evidence continued appearing, many confident opinions softened into quieter discussions. People stopped arguing quite so loudly and started asking more careful questions about bias, judgment, and responsibility. News organizations interviewed civil rights advocates, legal scholars, former airline employees, retired officers, and ordinary travelers. Each conversation added another layer to the unfolding picture. Experts explained how subtle discrimination often survives inside routine decisions rather than obvious acts of hatred. Viewers began recognizing that the incident represented something larger than one unfortunate mistake. Across the country, families discussed the case during dinner. Co-workers debated it between meetings. Travelers waiting at airport gates exchanged thoughtful conversations with strangers. Gradually, attention shifted away from blaming individuals alone and toward examining the systems shaping everyday decisions. Meaningful change, many realized, often begins when ordinary people question what once seemed completely normal. Inside headquarters, televisions remained switched on throughout the day. Employees watched quietly as reporters analyzed every development. No one celebrated positive headlines because everyone understood public trust would not return through carefully written statements alone. Credibility would have to be earned again. As the scheduled press conference approached, camera lenses turned away from Elijah Brooks himself. The nation no longer wanted only the story of one innocent passenger. Millions were preparing to ask a much larger question. How had an entire institution allowed this moment to happen in the first place? The hearing room remained silent long after the previous witness stepped down. Reporters adjusted their notebooks instead of whispering. Camera lights stayed fixed on the front table where executives, officers, and crew members waited with carefully prepared statements. Yet their confidence had disappeared before anyone spoke. The chairman sat quietly beside his attorney, showing no satisfaction. He watched the room with calm patience, understanding that truth rarely needed dramatic entrances when facts were already waiting to speak for themselves. Everyone sensed excuses would soon face reality together. The first executive cleared his throat. Our employees followed established procedures. Another manager shifted uneasily. That is my understanding, a flight attendant spoke softly. I believe there was a seating issue. The lead officer added, We responded to a security request. Another witness frowned. I thought identification had already been confirmed. The attorney looked across the table. Those statements cannot all be true. Silence answered before another witness admitted, I don't remember it happening that way. Prepared confidence slowly dissolved. Different versions collided without anyone raising a voice. Every careful contradiction created another crack inside the story they had rehearsed together. Reporters exchanged quiet glances, realizing the facts no longer fit the official narrative. The courtroom screens illuminated. Security footage appeared beside passenger recordings captured from different seats. Every movement unfolded exactly as it had happened. The attendant never requested additional verification. The officers never confirmed ownership of seat 2A. The videos preserved each pause without emotion, allowing actions to speak more honestly than memories ever could. The attorney turned toward the lead officer. You never confirmed ownership of the seat. The officer swallowed. We believed. You assumed. Nothing followed. Pens stopped moving. Even the cameras seemed quieter. Executives lowered their eyes. Officers avoided looking toward one another. No objection interrupted the silence because none could change what everyone had just witnessed. Across the nation, viewers watched certainty transform into regret without anger, celebration, or revenge. By the hearing's conclusion, nobody questioned what had happened anymore. The evidence had dismantled every excuse with remarkable patience, proving that justice sometimes speaks most clearly when facts are simply allowed to remain exactly where they belong. The hearing room remained silent after the previous testimony ended. Then the flight attendant entered alone. The confidence once visible in every measured step had vanished completely. Her eyes stayed lowered, her hands trembled, and she avoided looking toward the chairman. Nobody interrupted the silence because everyone understood this moment was no longer about defending actions. It was about facing truth together. After several long seconds, she finally lifted her head. Her voice barely carried across the room. "I judged him before I greeted him." Nobody reacted immediately. The simple sentence settled heavily over every listener. She offered no excuses, blamed no procedures, and sought no sympathy. Honest words replaced the certainty she once believed reflected true professionalism entirely. The investigators listened carefully while she continued. "I never hated him," she whispered. "I just believed something without realizing why." Those words exposed a quieter danger than open hostility. Years of unnoticed assumptions had shaped split-second decisions until unfair treatment felt ordinary. Bias had hidden inside familiar habits, disguising itself as careful judgment instead of prejudice completely. Questions continued gently. She replayed the boarding process inside her mind, remembering every glance and every hesitation. What she once called caution now looked painfully different. Her practiced smile had hidden unfair suspicion from everyone, including herself. She realized courtesy meant little when fairness disappeared beneath silent assumptions that shaped every decision before facts arrived first. Around the hearing room, her co-workers remained unusually quiet. Earlier statements defending procedures suddenly felt impossible to repeat. No manager interrupted. No colleague offered another explanation. They understood protecting one another had allowed deeper problems to survive unnoticed. Their silence no longer shielded mistakes. Instead, it acknowledged responsibility and the painful need for honest institutional reflection together. Across the country, viewers watched without cheering or condemning. Many recognized genuine remorse instead of arrogance. They understood accountability begins when people stop hiding behind explanations and examine beliefs shaping everyday choices. Her confession changed public conversation because regret felt sincere. It reminded audiences that prejudice often grows quietly inside ordinary thinking unless someone chooses to challenge it honestly. When her testimony ended, she looked briefly toward the chairman. He answered with only a respectful nod. Nothing more was needed. Her confession could never erase the harm already done, but it opened a door toward meaningful reform. By naming her own bias without excuses, she encouraged countless others to question silent assumptions before another innocent life carried their consequences. When the chairman finally rose, the room expected anger after everything he had endured. Instead, he walked calmly toward the microphone, paused, and looked across every face. His steady expression changed the atmosphere before he spoke. The absence of bitterness unsettled everyone more than outrage ever could, inviting listeners to reflect instead of defend themselves against uncomfortable truths together today. He began quietly. Respect should never depend on recognition. Offer dignity before titles, wealth, uniforms, or influence enter the conversation. If kindness waits for status, it was never respect at all. His words challenged every listener to reconsider how quickly assumptions replaced fairness during ordinary moments every single day, unnoticed until consequences finally arrived for everyone to witness together now. He described people whose stories never reached cameras or headlines. They returned home carrying quiet humiliation while life continued around them. Invisible prejudice left wounds hidden beneath ordinary routines. Most victims are forgotten, not because their pain is smaller, but because nobody stopped to listen before moving on again without asking one honest question first, with genuine compassion always afterward. Turning toward the executives, he continued, "Leadership begins when nobody believes anyone important is watching. Policies matter, but everyday choices matter more. Character appears in greetings, patience, fairness, and small decisions repeated daily. Build a culture where every passenger feels equally welcomed before anyone knows their name. Without exception or condition, every encounter shapes the company's true moral identity forever. He refused to demand revenge. Instead, he asked everyone present to accept responsibility with honesty. Punishment alone changes very little, he said. Real accountability admits mistakes, repairs broken systems, and protects strangers who have never met us. His calm words redirected attention from blame toward lasting reform, reminding everyone that justice grows stronger through consistent responsibility together always. Many listeners lowered their eyes as his message settled across the room. No accusation pointed directly toward any individual, yet countless people remembered remaining silent when questions should have been asked. His composure encouraged personal reflection instead of defensive reactions, revealing how ordinary bystanders can strengthen unfair systems simply by choosing comfort over courage during difficult moments. Finally, he looked across the hearing room and said, "The danger was never the handcuffs. The danger was how easily everyone believed I belonged in them." Nobody answered. The silence itself became the final witness. Long after the microphone switched off, those words remained, challenging every heart to choose dignity before assumption from that day forward. The chairman's final words lingered long after the hearing ended. When investigators released their conclusions, leaders admitted the crisis reached far beyond one wrongful arrest. Evidence exposed institutional failures hidden beneath routine decisions, forcing both airline and airport authorities to rebuild an entire culture instead of blaming a few individuals for a much deeper pattern of ignored responsibility at last. Several senior executives quietly submitted resignations, accepting responsibility for years of ignored complaints and weak oversight. Their departures meant more than lost careers. They demonstrated that leadership would now be measured through accountability instead of titles, influence, or carefully managed public image. Others remained only after committing themselves to meaningful reform with complete transparency every single day ahead together permanently. The officers involved entered disciplinary reviews where documented evidence replaced assumptions. Investigators examined procedures, decisions, and conduct without hostility or favoritism. Authority alone no longer guaranteed protection. Every action received careful scrutiny, reminding everyone that public trust survives only when power accepts responsibility under the same standards expected from every citizen it serves. Each single day without exception ever again, training changed immediately. New employees no longer memorized policies alone. They listened to real stories shared by passengers and co-workers whose experiences revealed unconscious bias inside ordinary decisions. Instructors reminded every class that professionalism begins with respect before rules are ever applied. Together every single day through empathy, careful, listening, equal treatment, and honest reflection during every passenger interaction always. An independent oversight board began reviewing every future complaint openly and fairly. Cases would no longer disappear into forgotten files or private conversations. Transparency replaced secrecy, giving passengers confidence that every concern deserved careful attention from impartial reviewers with published findings and clear follow-up. Procedures for everyone involved without delay or favoritism. Again, going forward together always. Thereafter, consistently nationwide. Inside the airline, co-workers gradually stopped protecting harmful behavior through silence. Supervisors welcomed difficult conversations. Employees challenged unfair assumptions, and quiet courage replaced comfortable avoidance. Small interventions prevented larger failures, proving cultural change grows. Because ordinary people choose responsibility over convenience, one conversation, one decision, and one respectful action at a time every single day, together without turning away again. The chairman never celebrated another person's downfall. Instead, he reminded everyone that justice is measured by meaningful change, not humiliation. The greatest victory was knowing future passengers would receive dignity before suspicion, fairness before assumption, and respect before recognition every single time they stepped aboard, because responsibility had finally become the system's strongest habit for everyone involved from then onward. The reforms began quietly, but their effects soon became impossible to ignore. Weeks after the investigation concluded, the executive floor looked unfamiliar. Hallways once filled with confident conversations now echoed with silence. Office doors remained open, lights stayed dim, and empty desks reflected a company entering a different chapter where certainty had surrendered to reflection and accountability, shaped every passing conversation instead. Former managers packed their belongings into plain cardboard boxes without ceremony. Family photographs, framed awards, certificates, and carefully collected mementos disappeared from polished shelves one piece at a time. Nobody gathered for farewell speeches. Nobody offered comforting words. The respectful distance surrounding those departures revealed that trust had quietly faded long before resignation letters had finally been submitted and accepted without objection. Walls that once displayed smiling team photographs and impressive achievements gradually became bare. Empty hooks replaced polished frames, leaving only faint outlines where memories had once been celebrated. Decorations could be removed within minutes, but the overlooked complaints, unanswered warnings, and invisible scars carried by forgotten passengers remained part of the building's history, refusing to disappear with fresh paint or renovations. Employees continued their work quietly whenever former executives walked through the corridors. Conversations paused naturally, not from fear or satisfaction, but from shared understanding. Nobody whispered in defense of decisions that had already been examined with honesty. Quiet accountability replaced the loyalty that once protected harmful choices behind conference room doors, allowing responsibility to stand where excuses had previously survived for years. Watching expensive plaques and engraved awards disappear into ordinary moving boxes left a lasting impression throughout headquarters. Decades of achievement suddenly occupied very little space. Employees realized professional success becomes surprisingly small when fairness, integrity, and respect are missing. No title, recognition, or corner office could outweigh the lasting value of treating another person with simple human dignity every single day. The building itself seemed to remember what many had once tried to forget. Elevators, meeting rooms, and executive hallways carried silent reminders of conversations that should have happened much sooner. Although the individuals responsible were leaving, the institution understood rebuilding public trust required, remembering painful failures instead of hiding them behind polished branding or carefully written corporate statements for future generations. Their final departures happened without television cameras or dramatic announcements. They simply walked through the headquarters one last time, carrying cardboard boxes instead of authority. Yet the quiet image remained unforgettable. It reminded everyone who watched that power is never permanent, and leadership loses its meaning the moment it forgets the dignity of the people it exists to serve every day. The chairman's compassion lingered in her thoughts, long after the hearings ended. Returning home, the former flight attendant expected peace but found only silence. Away from reporters and hearings, she faced the quiet weight of her own choices, discovering that regret often grows stronger when public attention finally disappears. Every empty room echoed memories she could no longer escape, leaving her alone with consequences no apology could erase. Neighbors who once greeted her warmly now offered polite nods before walking past without conversation. No insults were exchanged, yet the distance between them spoke clearly. She slowly realized trust, once broken, rarely returns through explanations alone. Even familiar smiles carried careful restraint, reminding her that respect must be rebuilt patiently, never demanded after harm has already been done deeply. Every mirror reflected someone she barely recognized. Folding her old uniform, passing framed photographs, and catching her reflection reopened the day one unfair assumption changed countless lives. Without anyone accusing her, she confronted the painful distance between intention and impact. Understanding character is revealed by choices more than self-image ever admits during comfortable moments of ordinary life each single day. One evening, her daughter quietly asked, "Were you really that person?" The question carried no anger, only confusion and sadness. She searched for words that never came, realizing honest regret sometimes begins where explanations finally fail and silence becomes the only truthful response. Inside her heart, the answer hurt more than any public judgment ever could, because her child listened. No courtroom remained, no cameras recorded her tears, and no headlines followed her home. Yet the emotional burden continued growing because true accountability is often lived privately, long after public attention moves on to another story. Each quiet morning demanded honesty before hope could return, one humble choice at a time, without excuses or self-pity anymore, despite lasting painful memories. Despite everything that happened, the chairman never asked for her humiliation. His restraint reminded everyone that justice seeks transformation, not cruelty. That quiet mercy made her reflection even more painful, because forgiveness offered the chance to confront herself honestly every single day without hiding behind fear or excuses again, while hope remained possible through genuine change and patient responsibility ahead. Seeing a person began before noticing a uniform. She finally understood prejudice begins whenever assumptions replace humanity. The lesson she carried forward remained painfully simple. Every passenger deserves to be seen as a person before being judged by appearance, status, or expectation. That truth became her quiet promise for every life she would touch from then onward with genuine respect. Months after the investigation, Seat 2A carried more than another first-class seat. What had once symbolized public humiliation slowly became a lasting reminder that dignity should never depend on appearance, assumptions, or the opinions of strangers inside a crowded cabin. Every journey now quietly honored the lesson learned there. Even when passengers never knew its remarkable history at all beforehand, the airline introduced stronger verification procedures, clearer accountability, and immediate review of discrimination complaints. These changes were presented not as public relations victories, but as necessary corrections shaped by one unforgettable incident exposing weaknesses hidden beneath years of routine operations. Leaders promised transparency, consistent oversight, and equal treatment for every traveler without exception going forward together each single day thereafter. Orientation no longer began with company history or customer service guidelines alone. Instead, recruits first heard the story of Seat 2A, learning how unconscious assumptions can quietly become harmful actions. Respect became the foundation of every lesson before procedures were ever discussed. Empathy came first, policies followed, and trust became everyone's shared responsibility from the very beginning onward, together always. The phrase "respect before assumption" appeared in training rooms, employee manuals, and leadership meetings. Unlike many corporate messages, these words carried real meaning because everyone understood the painful event inspiring them and the lasting consequences of forgetting such a simple principle. Daily choices gave the motto lasting credibility beyond posters or speeches alone forever afterward, together with humility intact always. Travelers experienced friendlier greetings, fairer treatment, and more thoughtful interactions throughout the airline. Few knew the complete history behind those changes, yet many sensed a different culture taking shape, where employees paused before making judgments and listened before reaching conclusions. Trust quietly returned one flight at a time, restoring confidence through everyday respect instead of assumptions alone again for all. No grand ceremonies marked the airline's transformation. Instead, success appeared through ordinary moments, respectful conversations, careful decisions, and complaints handled with honesty. The absence of dramatic celebration reminded everyone that meaningful progress grows quietly through consistent actions rather than impressive public announcements. Small victories strengthened lasting trust across every airport every single day without applause or recognition ever again afterward. The chairman never asked for monuments or recognition. His greatest legacy became the unseen moments when an employee welcomed a stranger without prejudice or suspicion. Each act of fairness honored the lesson of Seat 2A. Proving lasting justice is measured not by headlines but by everyday choices made with courage, compassion, and respect always for every passenger thereafter, together forever. Months after the airline embraced lasting reform, the chairman quietly reserved another ticket without informing anyone. He selected the same airport, the same route, and once again requested Seat 2A. Friends questioned his decision, but he simply smiled. Courage, he believed, meant returning to difficult places without allowing yesterday's injustice to decide tomorrow's peace or future for anyone. Walking through the familiar terminal, memories briefly surfaced before gently fading away. Every step reminded him of painful moments, yet none controlled him anymore. When he reached SIAT 2A, it no longer represented humiliation. Instead, it offered a quiet opportunity to discover whether genuine change had taken root. Inside the institution, he had rebuilt with patience and compassion. Together, a young flight attendant greeted passengers with the same calm professionalism regardless of appearance, clothing, age, or destination. She welcomed families, business travelers, students, and elderly guests with identical warmth. When the chairman approached, she checked his boarding pass politely, smiled naturally, and invited him aboard without hesitation or unnecessary attention from anyone nearby at all. Stopping beside seat 2A, she smiled warmly and said, "Welcome aboard." "Sir," he returned the smile with equal kindness. "Thank you," he replied softly. Nothing else followed. No explanations, no recognition, no dramatic revelation. That ordinary exchange carried extraordinary meaning because fairness had finally become routine instead of something earned through titles, wealth, or influence alone anymore. The greatest victory appeared through everything that never happened. No suspicious glances followed him down the aisle. No whispered conversations questioned whether he belonged. No unnecessary requests interrupted his journey. The absence of prejudice became the most powerful evidence of progress. Proving lasting change often appears through quiet moments rather than dramatic public celebrations for everyone watching together. Around the cabin, passengers noticed nothing unusual because respectful treatment had become ordinary again. Employees no longer searched for reasons to doubt strangers before offering kindness. Courtesy came first. Questions followed only when necessary, and professionalism quietly shaped every interaction. The airline's strongest achievement was becoming the place where fairness no longer surprised anyone aboard each flight daily. As the aircraft lifted gently into the morning sky, the chairman looked through the window with peaceful satisfaction. He never needed revenge to transform the future. His greatest triumph was knowing countless strangers would now board without unnecessary suspicion. Seat 2A would forever remind the airline that justice begins whenever dignity is offered before assumptions are ever allowed to speak. Years passed, yet the story refused to disappear. People remembered more than the day he was handcuffed. They remembered the quiet dignity that followed. Proving courage is measured less by what happens to a person than by how they choose to respond with patience, compassion, steady character, unwavering grace every single time. Despite unforgettable pain and lasting public memory together, the headlines slowly faded, but the lesson remained. News cycles changed, fresh stories arrived, and attention shifted. Yet inside training rooms, conversations, classrooms, and personal reflection, the incident continued reminding people that injustice often begins with ordinary assumptions, accepted without thoughtful examination, empathy, courage, or honest self-questioning before decisions become harmful habits affecting countless innocent lives every day, afterward, forever. One quiet decision changed more lives than anyone realized. The chairman never demanded revenge, publicity, or personal praise. By choosing accountability over retaliation, he transformed one painful moment into lasting institutional change. His restraint inspired employees, passengers, leaders, families, communities, and future generations to embrace fairness with compassion, humility, courage, every single day, forward together, always thereafter, with hope alive. The airline's greatest achievement could never be measured in profit. New aircraft, expanding routes, and financial success no longer defined its proudest accomplishment. Instead, respect shown to every traveler, regardless of appearance, background, or social status, became the organization's highest standard, inspiring trust, loyalty, confidence, compassion, daily across every journey without exception or hesitation, again ever afterward together, always onward. Every future passenger benefited from one man's quiet strength. Thousands of travelers would board flights without ever knowing the story behind the airline's transformed culture. Yet each fair greeting, respectful conversation, and thoughtful decision carried the unseen influence of one passenger whose calm resilience permanently changed how strangers were treated with dignity before assumption every single day. Thereafter, always together, his final words remained etched into the memories of everyone who heard them. Power isn't proven by the paycheck you sign. It's revealed by how you treat the person you believe has none. The quote became more than a conclusion. It became everyone's moral compass for generations, encouraging compassion, fairness, humility, daily through action and example alone, forever afterward, together always. The cabin fell silent, but the echo never ended. As the story faded into silence, its message continued traveling far beyond airports and boardrooms. Justice arrived without revenge, dignity overcame prejudice, and one quiet passenger reminded the world that humanity, respect, and courage remain every leader's greatest legacy for all who choose compassion before judgment, always, every single day forward. The cabin eventually disappeared behind memory, but the people who had lived through its lessons carried them forward into ordinary life. Years later, new employees, travelers, and even former critics still spoke about the story, each remembering a different moment. Some recalled the handcuffs. Others remembered the hearing. Most remembered the quiet man who refused to let humiliation become hatred. His greatest strength had never been authority or wealth. It had always been the discipline to answer injustice without surrendering his character. Every difficult choice he made reminded others that leadership is revealed through patience when anger would be easier. His legacy remained alive because he changed hearts before he changed policies. The former flight attendant carried a different memory. She often replayed the first glance she gave seat 2A, wondering how a single assumption had quietly redirected so many lives. The investigation had ended, but her reflection continued. She no longer defended herself. Instead, she encouraged new recruits to question their instincts before acting on them. Her honesty became more valuable than her former confidence. Regret did not erase the past, yet it prevented future mistakes by reminding others that unnoticed bias can become lasting harm. The officers also changed. Training sessions across the department now emphasized evidence before appearance, patience before authority, and questions before conclusions. Their experience became part of those lessons, not to shame them forever, but to remind every future officer that power carries responsibility long before action begins. Executives continued reviewing complaints with independent oversight, determined never again to allow silence to protect injustice. Passengers who once believed nobody would listen finally trusted their voices enough to speak. Perhaps the most important change appeared in ordinary moments. A respectful greeting, a careful question, a decision to pause instead of assume. Those small choices slowly rebuilt trust where suspicion once lived. The story never promised a perfect world, only a better one shaped by people willing to learn from painful truth. Justice endured because dignity never became revenge. The lesson quietly outlived every headline, proving that institutions change when individuals choose courage over comfort, humility over certainty, and humanity over assumption. In the end, the greatest victory belonged not to one man, but to everyone who decided another seat 2A should never happen again.